Hey everyone, thanks for joining me. Can you all hear me okay? Weather keeps changing. So just goofing off with the 335 and this 5859 Vibrolux like you do. And why is that fighting me? Just a second. I got a technical issue here. I had moved a cabinet to block out a light, and in the process, put a lot of strain on pressure on a power cable. So all the pedals I'm testing got moved way to the right, and I discovered just now that you cannot actually step on a foot switch when wearing house slippers. It just did not do anything. So. And which one am I on now? Hit the wrong button again. All right, that's where I wanted to be, except that it went back to the default, which is way too wet. Just 1 second. All right, I'll revisit that in a little bit. So that's the Vibrolux 5859. And the new version of the RC booster, the chrome one with the gain 1 and gain 2. So far, I really like it. And the Halo from Keeley. So let me go through some of the hellos that I've missed. Clyde Broadway, we'll get to your question on Wharfdale replacements. Hello, Ken. Federico from Italy. Ken Jepsen from Denmark. Federico asked about my opinion regarding Fender Tweed hand-wired reissues like the 57 Deluxe and the Twin. Better to get a Blankenship or Victoria. We'll get to that, though I think you probably know the answer if you can. Uncle Meat asked about the Roland Cube amp. I have not had any experience of them yet. So if someone in the group wants to answer him, that'd be great. But I have no experience, positive or negative, on that. So, William Gombert asked about tube preferences. I think we'll come back to that. I want to say hello to people. 5x5 Wes. Thanks for the tips on the latency. I'll be playing around with that some more. Hello, Rob. Hello, Gringo Pig up there in Scotland. Hip Metalworks from Vancouver Island. Nick Orr says, hey, Lyle, was cool to hear mention Dave and A2 guitars in that last live stream. He is the luthier and tech in my hometown, in my town. Great guy, and that vid series of his is fantastic. I'm glad to know that he's a great guy. It is a great series, and I think you're lucky to have a guitar tech like that in your town. Plenty of coffee, Sander. Not enough testing. Gringo says, turn on the scope. Okay. It'll take it a second to start to do anything. Hello, sir there, Curtis. Bone Stutter, RJ here from British Columbia. Hey, so you're RJ Schmerler, but you're Bone Setter. Okay. B. Ambule says, hello from Greece. Hello. Any thoughts on the AX84 schematics? There's so many different ones from that forum. So some of them are good, some of them are bad, some of them are indifferent. It's just, you'd have to be asking about a very specific one because lots of people submitted different recipes on that forum. Some of them better cooks than others. New Brunswick, Minneapolis. Mike Blue says, why don't builders use linear pots for everything? Audio taper is annoying. Well, I gotta differ with you there. linear taper is rarely a good choice for a volume pot. In that 5E8A circuit, it was, but that was a very unusual preamp circuit. In general, audio taper will give you a much better range of control for reasons that I don't have time to get into right now. But if you find last week's live stream, in the comments, I linked that series of videos from David at Ann Arbor Guitars, and it's the top comment. I pinned it, and in that he shows what the difference between log and linear is, and when you would use which, and why. So I think you are demanding something that you would be very disappointed with if you got what you think you want. Hey, Myrna Breen. Hi from Oakland, California. Enjoy 12x7 in phase inverter of AB763 from our Power 2 breakup. Per Rob suggestions. Any downside risks? No, it won't hurt a thing. It won't. It'll just sound a little gainier. Marshall uses a 12AX7 in a very similar circuit. There's nothing wrong with it, but Fender wanted to have very little breakup in the output section, so it's just a coloration choice. Let me scroll back up to some of those questions we had at the beginning. So Clyde Broadway says, I have an AC30 CC2, that's the custom classic, with your favorite Wharfdales. Wharfdales are really, really terrible, cheap copies of a G12H30, essentially. Could you recommend replacement speakers looking for classic tones? Well, while the Celestian Blue and other Alnicos are the classic sounds with the Voxes, they sound really good with a lot of speakers. The Creamback 65, the ET65, the Veteran 30, the Vintage 30, the G12H30. It's hard to go wrong with those. Some of the Alessandro Eminences would be good choices as well. Eminence used to make a red coat Alnico speaker that used to cost less than the Celestian. I don't think they're made anymore, and at the end of the run, they end up costing as much as the Celestian. The WGS Black and Blue is another good choice. I wouldn't go with the Celestian Alnico Gold in that amp. I find that due to other changes in that speaker, it distorts in ways I find too squashy, though the cleans can be nice. So Federico Spangero, hello from Italy. What is your opinion regarding Fender Tweed hand-wired reissues such as the 57 Deluxe, the Twin, etc.? They're going to be featured in my Amps Under $2,000 video, and they can be quite good, but they are not nearly as well built as the originals. There are various companies making similar Tweed style amps, Victoria especially, at about the same price point that are better. So I think that there's an upcharge from Fender's custom line, and upcharge for Fender hand wiring that the quality of the hand wiring does not really justify. Certainly the Eric Clapton series has got some silly overpriced stuff, and their Tremolux has got a lot of mistakes in it that anyone looking at that circuit would say, why did they do that? That's dumb. Let's change that. Let's fix that. I fixed a few of those. I know a lot of techs who fixed quite a few of those. So yeah, I would go with the Victoria if that's what you want, in that price range. I know that the Victoria can cost the same or more, and with the Victoria, you get what you pay for. All right, William Gombert says, good evening, Lyle. You often mention TAD red bass as your reference for power, maybe meant preference for power tubes, and sometimes EH, electroharmonics. But what brand do you recommend for power preamp tubes and rectifier tubes? The thing here, sorry, I dropped the pick, reaching subtly to get another one. I'll just use my fingers, I guess. I don't know why. This is my safety blanket. 3 years ago, my answer would have been different. But there are so few tubes available on the market right now. Most of the Russian ones are off the market, except for some smatterings of tongue saws and electroharmonics. A lot of Slovakian JJs, an increasing number of Chinese tubes, from the Pizvanes to generic Chinese tubes to the ones that TAD Tube Amp Doctor is marketing. Now those are Chinese tubes. I don't know whether they have them built to a different spec or whether they just do higher QA, QC on them. But the Chinese made, I think they're Pisvane made red base TADs seem to be pretty damn good right now. And I got some to put in fact, I got them right here under this silly hat. More on this in a moment. I got these for a deluxe reverb. I'm getting some for that Princeton. And they measure exactly matched. They sound great. There's no microphonics, but that's just, I haven't tried any of their other 636s. This is one pair that are really good. I will know more in time. I know that their EL34s have been really good. Their 6L6s have been really good, and I've tried a lot of those. So far, so great. On preamp tubes right now, there's not a lot of choices. And I've either been getting people JJs from a good vendor that sorts and tests them, or some TADs and some Pisvanes, but again, from vendors that test and sort. And I can say, I want these with low noise and low microphonics. I'm not ordering from just a bulk supplier who's like, oh, he wants tubes, get them off the shelf, send those tubes. So hopefully in a year or two, as the situation improves, we'll have more better choices again. Right now, you get the tubes that are available from a vendor you trust who stands behind what they ship. That's the best thing to do. I'm scrolling down. Gary Power says, I've liked the JJ ECC83S gold pins I get from Eurotubes. Well, Eurotubes is a good vendor, and JJ is a good brand. Thanks, Bonesetter. I'll read what you actually typed in a moment. I see it there. That's in real time, and this screen's where I'm at now, so I'll get to you. Thank you. There's absolutely no advantage to gold pins in a tube in an amp, and you pay extra for nothing. It's pretty. It's better than paying a lot extra for cryogenic freezing, or for the same Sovtech to be cryogenically treated and then sold as a gold lion or whatever for $100. Ambule says James Stack or FMV for bass amp. FMV, do you mean treble middle bass? I'm not sure what you mean by that. The James tone stack is a good way to get a tone stack without losing as much gain. You can also look at the back Sandal, and there's some overlap there. For a bass amp, any of them can get a great result. It depends on everything else in the amp. And, if you have an amp that has a treble middle bass, Fender style tone stack, and you change it to a back Sandal, you're going to have so much more gain, and that can introduce other problems. So it's not like this one thing is the variable. You got to have the entire circuit working together towards the same goal. But in general, any one of them, as done by a good designer, can be great, and they have advantages and disadvantages compared to each other. Abe Alejandro says, is it worth it to orient film foil signal capacitors? It is, but you won't always hear the benefit. And if you don't do it, you won't always hear the detriment. If you look at an AB763 Fender like that, or the AA764 like that, OG66 Fender neighborhood dentist there found in the Chicago dumpsters on garbage days. I don't know a good tech in the Chicago suburbs, but I'm sure someone will. Fender did orient the Blue Age X caps, and they're all oriented the same way in all those amps. And the orientation is to the side of lowest impedance, and whether that's ground or B plus varies on which part of the amp they're in. And that's kind of best practice. It doesn't always make a difference. In some circuits, in some parts of some circuits, It can. In general, if you know the outer foil, um, place it accordingly. If you don't, you can measure it and find out for yourself where and if it matters. Derek Ronan says, asks, any experience with the Egnator Tourmaster 4100? Just scored one recently for a great price, but the power transformer appears to have gone out. I heard these are special hand wound to spec. I doubt that they're hand wound to spec. I imagine that they are a custom order with some secondaries that other transformers on the market may or may not have. The Tourmaster series, the Tweaker series, all these things from Egnator in the last couple of years of the company have been plagued by bad cost cutting moves at the production plant. The designs are good, and then they're made in a factory, and the factory's been cheaping out. And I don't know this for a fact, but what I've heard, and it makes sense, is that rather than specing a transformer that really works in Japan at 100 volts and really works here at 120 volts, they just went with one that kind of runs at 110. And so it runs a little cold in Japan and tends to die here. You get something sort of, designed for 110, and it's just on the very bleeding edge of able to handle 110. Then someone uses it in a summer here in Memphis at 125 volts coming out of the socket, and it dies. So I'm afraid that while Bruce Egnator is fantastic, I know him. He's a friend of mine and is a great designer. The many of the Egnator models made in the past 10 years do not reflect his heritage, and that's a shame. Hey, Edward LaRose. Biambule says, would you bother implementing a DC heater supply? Well, it's not much of a bother to implement one if you do it well. You've got to look at 12 or 6 volts, and you got to look at parallel or series and stuff, and there are a lot of variations on it. In a lot of amps, it's not necessary. In a Fender, it's not really necessary. In a Vox, while the gain approaches that of a Marshall, you have cathode bias, so you have a free DC elevation available to you. On an old Marshall, sometimes it can, especially on a JACM 800, 2203, 2204, it can be very beneficial to do that because you can have a lot of hum injected into the 10K unbypassed cathode on the second gain stage. But that's a lot to add to an old Marshall. 1 second. All right, I'm back. Did the audio stay okay? Hey, Brad. Is the audio okay? Good. So while it's a good thing if I'm designing a new amp, I may not put it in an amp that's cathode biased because I can go ahead and have a DC elevation. And if I'm working on an old Marshall, rather than add a very large circuit to add DC rectification, DC heating to the first 1 or 2 preamp tubes, I'll just do an elevated reference off the phase inverter or screen supply, because that's 2 resistors and a capacitor. It's real easy to squeeze that in. But in general, if you're designing a mid to high gain amp today, and it makes no sense not to include it. And even Vox on the custom series, the AC15 and AC30C2 and C1 and CX and all that, they include it because it's easy to do. It's easily done and it pays off. David S says, hey, Lyle, where would you prefer to use carbon comp resistors as opposed to using metal film and oxide? It gets really tricky. If I'm restoring a 60s Fender, I'll use them everywhere that Leo did, except in the power supply itself. I'm not going to use it for the dropping resistors. I'm not going to use them for the screen grid resistors, etc. But the rest of the amp, I want to keep it historically correct. And I even use rather expensive CCs that are harder to get these days, but not sourcing Owen Allen Bradleys because they're almost none of them are available in the values we need. But some really nice stuff. Um, but in other amps, I don't use them because a lot of amps did not have them originally. JMI Voxes, I restored them a lot. Some of them had carbon comp, some of them had metal film. No, it's not metal films, carbon films. The carbon films often are the correct sound. Same for Marshall. After the JTM 45, JTM 50, they began to use fewer and fewer carbon comps and more carbon films. I don't use a lot of metal films as plates. I don't use a lot of metal films in the audio path unless I'm really trying to either squeeze out as much signal to noise ratio as possible, or I'm doing a replication of some amp that did use them. I'll use them sometimes in places in the audio path where there's no impact. Other places, carbon film is a better choice. In some cases, some specific metal films have a certain kind of sonic character. This gets really deep, and a lot of it gets very subjective. And I don't know if I were to go more in depth on this. I think a lot of people would go see what's on some other channel. There are people who say, I'll rip them all out of plates. Don't want them in the plates. The plates are one of the few places that it really absolutely does make a difference. Thank you, love. The coffee fairy arrived.
Hi.
Thank you, love. Oh. You can leave that one. I'll work. I need to drink faster, apparently. Thank you, love. So, if I'm going to have carbon comps in an amp, I'll have them in at least one or two plates. Maybe not the V1A plate, but maybe the V1B plate. Thanks there, Bone Setter. All right, let's see. Oh, Fender Marshall Vox style tone stack. That's what FNB. Okay, I would just always read that set as TMB. The Vox is actually not that. If you look at what Vox is doing, they're almost doing that and they get it wrong. And that mistake is kind of awesome. I do love the sound of that amp with that echo. Moody Loner says, I'm looking at a 94 Mesa Boogie Blue Angel. Are the earlier Mesa Boogie amps just as problematic from a service perspective? There are three, pardon me, swallowed wrong. There are three basic divisions of Mesas. There are the early ones, the Mark 1s, the SOBs, and Mark 2s, where everything is just on a really flimsy board that was etched by hand, and all the components are just tack soldered, and all the little pins on the tube sockets are just pressed over and tack soldered to the board. That's one level of crap. The next level of crap is when they start going into PCBs and all the traces are too close together, and things like to arc and things like to burn, and they don't know how to do calculate secondaries on their transformers, and they don't know how to do any standard voltage drops. So they'll have like 12 resistors in series all to drop a voltage, and they use carbon comp, so they burn, and then they burn the board, and all this is really bad. But at least they used octal sockets. The power tube sockets were at least attached to the chassis mounted sockets, so it's not quite so bad, even though there's a lot of ground loops there, and the ground's being made to chassis, but there's pain and it's not really great. And then the third iteration is you take all that stuff from the beginning, and then you move all the power tubes to the bad PCB as well. So it's just like the trifecta of bad ideas by the time you get to the current stuff. So no, there are no well-built Mesas ever any series. There are some which are staggeringly worse than others. That's the extent. So it starts down there and just keeps on going. I don't know that they found their bottom yet. Let's see. Just after I bought a used, Philip Acorn says, just after I bought a used 90s Fender Custom Shop Tone Master, you said you preferred some Randall to Zinke Fender designs. What do you think about the Tone Master and the Vibro King? I don't think I've ever mentioned any Randall amps on here. Most Randalls are solid state, and you know, they don't really sound that great unless you're going for very specific genres. That said, I prefer any Fender era ever to any of the Zinke design Fenders. The Tone Master and the Vibro King, my God, for what they charge for those things, you should all get your money back. He used dual gang 500K linear taper pots for everything. And he would wire them either as the full, in, you know, just half a pot or both of it together, depending on what value you wanted to get. Everything's tack soldered. The ground scheme is insanely overcomplicated and bad. The Vibro King and the Tone Master don't do what they say on the tin. The Vibro King is kind of the 6G whatever Fender reverb unit put in front of one channel of a super reverb. It's not really either of those things, and he doesn't understand how input impedance works, or grid references, or DC blocking. There's just an awful lot of bad in those, both from the concept to the build to the execution. But really, if you open up an amp like that and all the pots are cheap 24 millimeter dual gang pots, like the cheapest of the cheap pot metal stuff, and they just wire them differently depending whether they want them to do 250 or 500, it's insulting. Sorry to be the bearer of real news on that. Thanks, Mr. Buttons. Deluxe Reverb with the Master Volume style amp recommendations. Well, that gets a little tricky. You can put a Larmar in any of the classic Fender designs, any of the classic push-pulls, and it's fine, from the Princeton to a Twin, including the Deluxe Reverb. Deluxe Reverbs, though, they take pedals really well, you know, and the overdrive sound out of the amp, unless you're cranking it up and going full Rick Nielsen, most people aren't getting a lot of drive out of it. So, you know, you can just keep the existing volume low and use pedals. You can also, of course, you know, crank the thing. But the thing about the Fender circuit, let me turn the volume down on this a little bit. The thing about the Fender circuit on the Deluxe Reverb is the whole thing works together. And so if you're going for that Rick Nielsen crank Deluxe Reverb thing, then you hit a master volume on it, you're going to lose some of the character you're after. But, you know, so I've got this Tweed Vibrolux in the gain volume at 9 o'clock, and here's an overdrive pedal. Granted, that's a fairly light overdrive pedal, but, you know, that's quieter than you would ever use on stage. So I'm not sure why you need to add a master volume if you're using a pedal of your choice in front of it. Sorry. Is Egnator officially gone, Kevin Donahue? He says Egnator is no longer. That was an abused brand, and I think they bought the name and bought the designs and ramped everything up really fast, and they were pushing them with Musician's Friend and all this stuff. See, I'm replying to the comments, and everyone else is ahead of me. So some dude was just asking about the Deluxe Reverb Master Volume, and I said Larmar, and everyone just was like, "Hey, do the Larmar." So yeah, thank you all for agreeing with me before I even said anything. My idle teaching says I've been offered a PV30 with the transformer problem. Not sure if that's input or output. Not sure if it's worth it, though. I like the tone. If it's got a transformer problem, it's not worth it. You won't be able to get that, and fitting something else in is a money pit. Embry Smith says Bradley is a mod. Well, Brad's a mod. Hey, hey, Bill Bach. Billy Bach. Billy Bach. Yeah, Gary Power, the new old stock RCA black plates are crazy expensive. Anyone with experience using the RG Keen Zener MOSFET combo to drop voltage, anything better as a recommendation? Andy K asks. Yeah, it works great, Andy. The same concept, if you make it variable rather than just where it is, it becomes power scaling, variable voltage. Yeah, it all works fine as long as you know that heat has to go somewhere and plan for it accordingly. Chris Yarn says 65 Princeton reissue with Fromel Supreme and your reliability in tone videos. Recently started getting a high-pitched bubbling sound present regardless of tone and volume settings. Any advice? Love the content. Well, I don't know what the Fromel Supreme is or how it was implemented. And high-pitched bubbling sound is a difficult one for me to visualize. But in general, pull tubes working, if you're looking at the amp from the back, from right to left until the sound goes away. And if the sound goes away when you pull V3, problem somewhere in V3. If it only goes away when you pull V4, which is the phase inverter in a Princeton, at least it's not in the output section, it's somewhere ahead of that. But it could also be a negative feedback thing. But I don't know what mods you did to that amp, so I cannot remotely diagnose beyond that. Thanks, Andy K. Appreciate that. Wim says, greetings from Holland. I still have my second amp that I bought as a teenager in the 80s, a JCM 800 combo. And I got a Fender reissue Princeton in 2014. He gave me some great info. Thanks. Glad to have been helpful to you in your tone quest. That's a great pairing. You can use the JCM 800 with the master volume really low, and you can turn the Princeton up as much as you like, and they'll go great together. Hey, Zach. Zach Childs is here. For those of you who don't know, Ask Zach has a fantastic channel. And I'm grateful that you made it, man. So everyone who doesn't know, check out Zach's stuff. Real good information, history of the instrument, history of playing, history of pop, country, rock, and really cool toys like this. Only he likes the ones that aren't quite as fancy. Bill Box says, how do they affect the plates? When the signal not go through the resistor, it goes through the coupling cap. I'm not sure what it's like you're replying. I'm not sure what your question there is. Sorry. The Fuzz Box says, if you are not accepting outside work, who would you recommend another amp tech? Well, there are lots of guys all over and gals all over the country. But I will be accepting outside work again in January. I'm almost caught up, but I don't know where you're at, so I can't say, oh, you need to call my buddy Bob or Barbara, depending on where you live. So. I have not worked on any of the Trainer PCB amps, Edward Kowalski. I got a buddy up in the Toronto area who has, and he's less than thrilled with them, but I have not had one myself. Yeah, Brad, I mean, you grow up seeing all the rock stars play Mesas, and you see all the ads in the guitar magazines, and you're like, I want that. If I had that, all my problems would be solved. It's so awesome. And look, you can get the new dual rectifier, and it's covered in black leather, and it's got like that truck tread chrome, and it's just the coolest thing ever. And you think it's some real high quality thing, and then you, as a tech, you get in one, you're like, what the actual fuck? What is this? So, you know. Bill's asking about the Larimar. It pulls down the signal pre-grid resistors, goes complete. Yeah, there's no effect on the bias if it's wired correctly. Turn that delay off. It's a little over the top. I'm still learning the halo. If you're doing like a chord thing that hangs, it's great. But as soon as you just do a kind of thing like that, it gets a little over the top. I think Timmons is writing his expression pedal the whole time, so I need to spend more time with it. Jesse says the feed is herky-jerky. I apologize for that. I don't have any control over that. I'm watching the feed on my iPad, so I can get a sense of when it drops out, if it drops out or gets blocky. And I'm not seeing any of that here. And I'm not watching through my, I'm watching on the iPad through the internet. So I'm seeing it at the same time that you're seeing it. So I think it's going to depend on your local ISP. Brad says, play the brass and pocket riff. If I can remember how it goes. Somewhere around there. Things I have known in the past. Yeah. Brad is a mod who is a rocker, whereas I am just a mocker. Sorry, that's a total joke lift from Ringo. Sorry, Nick Orr. He says he asked earlier, but he got the question got buried. He uses a JTM 45 with 6L6 tubes. Would it be worthwhile to try KT66s? What changes in sound feel would I expect to get with that change? Well, your heater supply will come down a little bit. The heater voltage will drop a little bit because they draw more current. Do you use a real JTM 45 or one of the Marshall reissues? Because the Marshall reissue transformers are just on the edge of making it as is, and the KT66 does draw more heater current. And if the output transformer is really physically close to those tubes, that can cause some issue too, just from the radiant heat. You can try them. Know that KT66s, unless you're paying crazy prices for old ones, have not been made as well as they used to be. And that it is very similar in most aspects to the sound of a L6. And you can introduce other problems in the amp, or the bias isn't quite set right. The KT66 version of that circuit actually used different or no screen grid resistors or different grid stoppers compared to the later 34 and 6L6 variants. And even if you do all those things, you won't necessarily sound like whoever your JTM 45 player of choice is. And they would still sound great through your amp with 6L6s or 34s. On that note, the Marshall reissue output transformer and those things is the impedance is really preferable for 6L6s than 34s. So they were really doubling down on the 5881 at the time that thing was designed. Boyd Timothy says, should there be much white noise on a deluxe reverb reissue with all the controls turned all the way down? No, deluxe reverb with all the controls turned all the way down should be almost totally quiet. You might hear a little bit of hum, just to let you know that it's on, but it's not even the hum that a microphone would pick up. If you have a 68 custom reissue, and it's not really a reissue, but the 68 custom version, you will hear tons of white noise. But if you have a real deluxe reverb or the 65 reissue, you actually, if you have the 65 reissue in stock form, you're going to hear a little bit of white noise, even with the volume turned all the way down, for two reasons. Number one, the lead dress in there is not great, and you can often improve things just by having a tech very carefully move wires around the tube sockets with a chopstick just to find the quietest position. And number two, the signal goes from the volume pot of the tremolo channel, vibrato channel, to V2B, pin 7 of the second tube, through a fairly circuitous route on the circuit board, and then the small one, and then on the large one, and it passes by some other stuff it really shouldn't pass by, and that can inject noise into the amp at all times. And the other thing is that the output of that tube stage V2 goes through a 10 picofarad cap, which is not always great in the reissue, and that can also add a little bit of noise at V4B's grid. These are addressable though, but I'm talking real quiet white noise is normal. If you have more than just a slight, you got an issue. Kevin Donahue says the Know Your Gear dude said Egnator was no more. That's Phil McKnight, who I think is just absolutely fantastic for some reason. I'm just really fond of Phil McKnight lately. He was kind enough to give me a shout out last week on his live stream, and I've noticed an increase in subscribers since then. So thank you, Philip, if you see this. At first I thought you said Gearman dude. And do you guys know Gearman dude? Is anyone sure that he is not, in fact, Jack Black? David S. says, do you feel the choice in cab material, pine, plywood, etc., contributes to sound? Yeah, it does. Not always in ways that are predictive, though. If you design everything with void-free birch plywood, you're going to have very consistent results from cab to cab. If you're designing everything with very dry, light pine, some of your cabinets are going to sound awesome, and some of them are going to sound just like the plywood ones, and some of them are going to sound terrible, and you won't have any real control over that. Maybe you'll get to the point where you can tap on the plywood like a luthier selecting an Adirondack spruce top and know what you're going to get. But there's so much oddness to the physics of how cabs work. I would not buy an amp or not buy an amp because of the plywood, high quality plywood versus pine or whatever. If I played the amp and I like the sound, I like the sound, regardless of what it's made of. If I don't like the sound, then it doesn't matter what it's made of. It matters what is made of in terms of, is it going to hold up? If I pick it up by the handle, will the handle fall off? Will the chassis fall out? Will the whole thing split apart? That level matters. But once you get to, hey, it's solidly constructed, if it sounds good, it doesn't matter if it's heart pine or just plywood. Al Moreno says, hey, Lyle, where can I find those blue ceramic class 2 capacitors used on the Fender Twin? I get almost all the components like that from Mauser, and those are Vishay parts. So the big blue one, that's a 22 nanofarad 1 kilovolt. So if you go to Mauser.com and put in ceramic disc cap, and then 22 nanofarad 0.022. 1 kilovolt. You can probably sort from 500 volts up if you want to. You'll find that. A Die Cutting Solutions says, mono price 15 watt. Thoughts? I have no price. Don't buy Chinese junk. you get what you pay for, and that means everything. Asax says, "Thanks, friend." That just makes my heart happy. I guess you guys know what I'm talking about because you watch me, but I watch Zach, and it's so strange when you're some guy you're watching on your computer is real, and you like pick up the phone and they're there. And I'm 51 years old. I know how the world works. But we grew up watching television, and this is just kind of the extension of television. So um, whatever that weird thing is that we grew up with watching people on the TV and wishing we could be like them, it's easy to transfer a little bit of that to the internet people. Zach, me, uh, Friedman, Phil McKnight. And so I talked to Zach for the first time on the phone a couple months back, and I was like, "Oh my god, it's really him!" What a stupid reaction on one level, but totally understandable. I won't do the whole thing. I need to practice it anyway. It's a nice little workout. If you don't know what I'm talking about, Ask Zach has an opening theme, and it's really a cool little piece of music. And apparently, he wrote it as a left hand exercise for himself, and it actually is really good because it fights your muscle memory. Your hand wants to do the same thing each time and mirror it. Like, so this is the pattern, and then I repeat the pattern again and I repeat the pattern again. But each time it's a little bit different, and your ring and your pinky fight each other. Rob F. Yeah. MDF is not the same thing as high quality birch ply, so I would not go with MDF if you can help it. That said, there are lots of amps. I got a Vox AC15 C1 over there. It sounds great in its MDF cab. The reason to avoid MDF if you can is the good stuff, and that is the good stuff weighs an awful lot. David S. asks if I'm missing the Les Paul at all. No, not at all. And first of all, the SG does the higher gain stuff, and there's always an overlap. Number two, the Les Paul was really heavy, and notice I don't have any hands on this. If I did this with Les Paul, it would have gone and fallen, or always wanted to tilt over like that. It just didn't sit on my lap well. That's one level of it. The other level is that it's hard to show this, but the distance between here where my leg would be and where my hand goes to play the strings on the Les Paul was much shorter. It came up quite a bit more right here. And so I was playing everything much lower. It was just very weird on my right hand. I'm just not a Les Paul guy. And between this and the SG has a space for the leg much more like this, these are just much more comfortable. And that was not a heavy Les Paul, but the difference in weight between the Les Paul and the SG and this are dramatic. B. Ambule says, "What amp do you believe every guitar player should own?" That is a great idea for a video. I would say there are amps that are very genre specific. If you're going to play hard rock, I'd like everyone to spend some time with a 59 or 100 watt uh, plexi. It can be a 70s, but 1987, 1959, because you would learn something very important. A couple of things very important on that. You would learn how to control feedback, noise, your proximity to the amp. Those things will, if you're used to playing a modeler that doesn't have any huge interaction with the guitar and the pickups in the room, you're going to sound terrible playing through one of those things at stage volume. So you got to learn, all right, hey, this hand has to be here. I have to be muting. I have to roll down between, at any pause or use a volume pedal. You got to have real good right hand control because the stuff that is in the background on a modeler is right in your face, in the audience's face. You clean up your technique, but that's for a genre specific thing. I'd say a deluxe reverb would probably be the one that every guitarist should at least experience, to have a baseline of, okay, this is what a guitar amp can be. This is like the platonic ideal of a guitar amp. And even if you're like, hey, that was great, but I really prefer the super reverb, you will know, you make an informed decision. Or, I've got my friend Sturgis, who was here the other day playing his Blue Sparkle Strat. He hates deluxe reverbs. He likes tweeds. He loved the sound of that little AC-15, which is circuit-wise much more similar to a small version of a Bassman than it is to anything else that Fender did, and by which I mean the 5F6A. But I think if the one amp that everyone should experience is a really good deluxe reverb, because whether you play jazz, country, blues, rock, whatever, you can get a sound out of that. And then you'll have a good basis of comparison to every other amp you play, that, hey, that amp sounds pretty good, but the other one was better. Or for what I do, this is better, and now I know that. You're not going to be second guessing yourself. Haggadis says, hey, Lyle, hope you are well. I am. Hope you are as well. I have a question regarding a master volume that's really low in output from 6 to 12. After 12, it's full volume. It's a EL 84 Bad Cat Mini 2. Thanks again. I mean, from 7 o'clock to 12 o'clock, not numbers on the dial, but from 7 o'clock to 12 o'clock, it's really low in output, and then it gets full volume. They have the wrong taper master volume there, probably. That sounds like they've got an audio taper, and in some circuits, for a master volume like that, linear will give you a better response. You could also play around with a 30% J taper. Depends on whether that master volume in that Bad Cat is done before or after the phase inverter, or it could be that that they are using a crossline. If it's like an AC-15, a crossline master volume, if they have the wrong taper pot, can get really quiet really fast. Like no change, no change, no change, and it's quiet. But without seeing your Bad Cat or taking measurements, I can't tell you more than that. It's probably something simple. RPs asks, is it worth buying a silver face twin and modding it to modify the roll-off filter to provide a more direct line from preamp gain stage to the power amp? I have no idea what you're talking about. There is no roll-off filter. The preamp gain stage goes straight to the power amp in a silver face twin. So I'm not sure what you're asking. I don't mean to be dismissive or sound, that's crazy talk, but I'm not sure what you meant there. So Joachim Yonker asks, have you ever worked on a Hummel Electronics The Studio guitar amp? No, I have not. I have not heard of the Hummel The Studio, but I'd be curious to. Thanks, Richard Clark. Yeah, G-Man Music. I know the Bruce is still around. I'm friends with Bruce, and he's got his E3 audio starting up, and he does his amp building classes. But Egnator, I didn't know whether that was still a going concern. I knew he sold it. Brad says, check the temperature coefficient when ordering ceramic caps. Yeah. Where's my thing? I want a little bit of variation from temperature in a Fender, say the 250 picofarad in the tone stock. I don't want any variation in a Fender if I use the ceramic disc for the tremolo. I don't use the Z series, but I may use a Y. I prefer an X or better, and that gets in the weeds. Steve Lark, speaking of all these things, including the weeds, which type to use an audio path, which for a trim oscillator? Yeah, in a Fender in the tone circuit, I use a class 2 whenever I can get a class 2, because that will distort in the ways that the old class 2 discs did that Fender used. In the tremolo circuit, the LFO, the 20 or 22, then 10-10, or sometimes 22-22-10, depending if you want a slower trim. I prefer to use the Murata MLCs, which is a multi-layered dipped, and they're fantastic little things. You can also get TDK, the little blue ones. You've seen me use them before. Mauser's website is hard to navigate if you need a few things and you're a casual builder or whatever. But if you're serious about this and you want to get into things, not only will you have many more options available to you than what you get at a tube amp store parts department, you'll have better prices typically, especially if you learn that, oh, that's 47 cents. But if I buy 10, it becomes 4 cents. So I can buy one for 47, or I can buy 10 for 40 cents. You know, there are tricks you find out as you go along. I don't think anyone is starstruck over Phil McKnight. Let's not get carried away here. Hey, speak for yourself, man. The guy is a god among men. The whole concept of YouTube stardom is crazy. But it's cool for the rest of us. We get to play Rockstar on a very small scale. I think, I was flipping after we watched some TV show last night. My wife and I were sitting on the couch and we're just flipping the YouTube channels, and she's like, "There's that guy again," meaning me. And she's like, "There's that guy again." There's another one of my videos that popped up, and she was like, "Oh my God, that has like 5,000 views, and that one's got like 4,000 views. That one's got like 7,000 views. You're doing so great, honey." And I'm like, "Well, thanks." And then the next one up was Rick Beato, and he posted it 15 hours before, like 5 hours earlier that day, and he had like 150,000 views on one video. I'm like, see, yeah, I mean, I'm doing really great and in a very small bowl, and Rick Beato's out there, but he's got like 3 million subscribers, so that's crazy. But I like his stuff. So Weetabix, no thank you. Hey, Zach, thank you very much, and I enjoyed you on Keith's chat. Was that yesterday or the day before? Chris McQuinn, did I miss an announcement on super chat questions? I guess you have. In every live stream since I've started doing this, I have super chat enabled if someone wants to make a donation. And if you do, I'm very grateful. But that is not a condition to have your question answered. I try to answer all the questions as they come in the sequence they come in. So, I'm grateful for anyone who wants to help my cause along and all that. I don't want it to be a condition. Like, hey, I'll ask you a question if you make things a little sweeter for me. I think it's a little bit crass, and I don't need to do that. Producer man says, I always thought Fender Twins were the basic amp that everyone should know. Well, back in the day, yeah, but now they're really, really loud for most stages. And a deluxe reverb, if you change the mid resistor especially, will get you that sound at a lower volume. Andy K says, I'm having a hard time nailing down minimal credentials for an amp tech. Good smile and a multimeter only get you so far. Well, I'm missing a tooth as a result of a COVID-related dental thing back when I couldn't go to the dentist. I'll get that fixed soon. My wife is here to take away, and I'm talking more than I'm drinking. I have to mend my ways. She's got the great smile. She's got the great smile. I don't need one. So I don't have the tooth, the great smile right now. and my meter's on the other side of this stuff, and it's a $20 Amazon one because I kept breaking my expensive meters. And I have an English degree, and I've never had an electronics class or a even a math class beyond geometry or trig, whatever it was in high school. So, you know, um, I am not the way to structure your career path if you want to go into this. All right. Chris Quinn, yeah. Is Lyle not answering super chats? I'll answer any super chat, but I'll answer any question that I can get to. You don't have to donate to get your question answered. Chris V says, after watching a bunch of your videos, I found a 69 Bandmaster reverb head, all original, and a 68 cap for a good deal. I love it. Best reverb I've heard in a 60s Fender. Thanks. Well, you're very welcome. The Bandmaster reverb head is a pretty rare amp. I'm not sure how much they made of those, but you notice how tall it is. Resist the urge to ever put it in a shorter head cab. Otherwise, the reverb will no longer be great. That distance is why that reverb sounds good. That's why they made the Bandmaster reverb taller than other head cabs. Brad said, "Yeah, I've seen electronics guys, from electricians to actual electrical engineers, do horrible work in amps. Like wire nuts, because that's what they do when wiring an outlet. Um, no knowledge of the conditions inside an amp or how audio works. So a lot of stuff would be fine if you're wiring up a jacuzzi, and there are a lot of amps that are being designed these days by major companies where some 24-year-old electrical engineer is doing all the design, and they've never used a tube amp in their life. They may or may not play guitar, and they're designing everything as if it's a cell phone, and what works in a small circuit like a cell phone or a Blu-ray player or whatever, where there's not a lot of heat, does not work in a guitar amp. I am not qualified to have that job because I don't have the piece of paper that says electrical engineer, electronics engineer, whatever on it. Flip side of that, the guys who graduate from Stanford and MIT, et cetera, or any good accredited university with an electrical engineering department, who graduate top of their class are not ending up at Fender or Marshall or Vox. They're at Cisco, they're at Google, et cetera. Those who are making the Black Stars, those who are making the Fender XD stuff, see, I didn't say anything. I'm so positive. It hurts how positive I am. What was the problem with the divided by 13 amps you'd mentioned? Chris Quinn said, the tubes are too close together. Their wires are too close together. Um, uh, the wrong kinds of wires are used for things. It's really good circuits, not built as well as they should be. I don't want to belabor the point because I don't have one to show you. Next one that comes in, and hopefully the next one that comes in is just awesome. And all the ones I've had in the before that caught on fire again and again because of bad wiring mistakes repeated over and over again were outliers. And I got all the bad ones. Ask Zach says, what are your thoughts on current hand-wired amps from the big guys? I'd like to say better things about that. Voxes, there was a real limited run of fully hand-wired AC30s built to the JMI specs. Those are pretty cool, but extraordinarily expensive. The AC15 and AC30 hand-wired, excess wiring, excess spaghetti beneath the board, a lot of tack solder connections done with not very high quality lead-free solder, a lot of ceramic disc caps that tend to be not very good sounding and very microphonic, and 16 millimeter pots. So you have a cheap pot. It's not tight to the chassis. And yes, it's hand wired to its connection on the PCB, which has turrets. So it kind of looks like a full turret board, but underneath the turrets are PCB. It's a PCB. The whole thing could have been built as PCB. And I have gone in the past and removed all the excess wiring from the AC30 hand wired, and I pulled out about 7 feet of excess wire because they're not wired to sound fantastic. They're wired to get them out the door. The Fender stuff, the 64 custom deluxe reverb, it's poor hand wiring. It's a really shoddy quality PCB that's disguised as an eyelet board, and it doesn't hold up through repeated service. It doesn't have the correct vibrato tremolo circuit. It has a the bias trim like on a Princeton, or actually like this. And there's nothing wrong with that, but that's not the vibrato tremolo circuit that belongs in a deluxe reverb. The Marshall hand wireds, I haven't had so many of. I've seen the pictures look great, but I think I've only had one in, and it had a bad tube and needed to go back out the next day, so I didn't spend much time with it. I know that PRS has a few amps which have more hand wiring than others. The David Grissom's a pretty good amp. They had one that was like a Fillmore thing modeled after what Dwayne used at Fillmore East, and they found the guy who made the transformers, and I looked inside that. That was quite good, but most of the other PRSs, even the ones which have some hand wiring, like the 2-channel C and 2-channel H, are not very good, and that's a shame. Jeff Mansfield says, Fender Cyber Twin. Saw one in a store the other day and it was interesting. What do you think? Man, how many times did they tell us that was going to change everything? It was going to be the new standard by which we judge all tube amps. Sadly, that was not true. They used crazy expensive servo pots, so when you entered your preset, it wasn't just that the mids went from 3 to 7; it physically turned. Those parts have been available in a long time. They didn't sound very good. They weren't built well. They didn't last very long. This is a 59 Vibrolux. It's been going for what, 60-something years now, 62, 3 years. If anything in that amp failed, I could fix it tomorrow and keep going and keep going. There will be no Cyber Twins available to play in 65 years. I'm not sure how many of them are even playable and restorable now. So avoid. Sam DeFranco says, I have a mid-60s Vibrolux reverb, but have never played a deluxe. To be honest, how do they compare design and sound-wise? That's a really interesting question, which I think every amp designer or would-be designer should look at, because the circuit board, the preamp, everything in the amp of a deluxe reverb is exactly the same as a Vibrolux reverb. The deluxe reverb and the Vibrolux reverb is the same board with one difference. The 6v6 version, the deluxe reverb, has a 47 ohm tail resistor to ground in the phase inverter, and the Vibrolux, which has 6v6s, has 100 ohm. Other than that, they're the same. The preamps are the same. The filtering is the same. The dropping resistors are the same. The only differences are the power transformers, output transformers, and the output tubes. And then one has a single 12 and one has 2x10. And what's really interesting is that while the Vibrolux has more output than the deluxe, because it has two 6L6s and it has the larger transformers, its output transformer is not much larger than that of the deluxe reverb. The deluxe reverb is a 23 watt amp, 22 watt amp. The Vibrolux reverb It's probably like a 30-watt amp, but the output transformer that they spec'd for it is about a 23, 25-watt output transformer because they didn't want it to overlap with the Super or the Pro, which also had 2 6 L6s. And so or the Bandmaster. So the Vibrolux has a lot more output that is then being squeezed through an output transformer that cannot handle that output, and the output transformer saturates and you get distortion, and that's part of why a Vibrolux reverb sounds so fantastic. It, you know, uh, in fact, I think Zach and Keith were talking. Keith Williams were talking yesterday in that live stream, or was it the day before? I don't remember. I was up on a ladder scraping paint. Um, about Danny Gatton and how he would turn his Vibrolux up real loud and keep the volume real low on the guitar because he had all that sensitivity going, all that nuance. And a lot of that is because that Vibrolux, when you turn a Vibrolux up, the output saturates, and other Fenders don't do that at all the same way. It's a very unique sounding amp. All right. I think at this point, we've been doing this for about 2 hours and 12, about an hour and 12 minutes. I think it's time to take a brief break. And I have even prepared something fancy for that. So I'm going to take about 4 minutes. I suggest you all do the same. Stretch your legs, and we will resume. All right, we're back. Let's see. And it scrolled down on me automatically. Let me try to get back to where I was. I know it can be difficult waiting for me to get to what you say because I'm behind, but I do try to answer as many questions as I can. I'm gonna try to do a little bit of a speed round to catch up a little bit. So let's see, because I famously digress. That's why I need my T-shirt. I don't have any comments on the Rev amps. The ones I've heard on the internet sound great. I'd love to try one. Scott Dunn asked, "Can most 6L6 amps be converted to EL34?" Yes, but there can be other things you have to do. Some bias tweaks. Don't do it. Just don't pop them in and hope for the best. Second note, yeah, the COVID thing when you can't go to the dentist was a lot of fun. Uh, Robert M. Hey there, speaking loud, just got original Ampeg V4. Why the hell is it so much louder than amps of similar wattage I have? It's insanely loud. Um, I would have to refresh my memory of the schematic. Did they use cathode followers before the output tubes the way they do on the SVT on that? I think that the V4 in some ways is like a mini SVT, which can make it really, really big and loud. But I'd have to look at the schematic. I don't get as many V2s and V4s as I do Fenders and Voxes and Marshalls and stuff. Uh, RRP says, thoughts on the Fender 68 custom champ. That's the champ with reverb. The reverb's digital. It's an okay amp. I don't think they're great. People will disagree, but in that wattage, while it costs more, the Swart is the by far the better amp. I have not worked on a Tone King Imperial Mark II. I don't have any assessment of them. I hope that they're great. I know that the ones that Mark was making back in the day before he sold to BAD, Boutique Amp Distribution, those were great. I hope that they still are, but I have not had one come in. Oh, T, I didn't see. He says I offered to send my 57 custom champ hand-wired to Lyle for review at the beginning of the chat. I'm sorry I missed that. Shoot me an email. That might be doable, but I don't want to take your amp away from you for an extended period. Man, yeah, I mean, a good Telecaster is all you need, but I want more. I do like a good Telecaster. Mine, I'm in the process of getting my body refinished. Not this one, but my Blackguard. I wasn't happy with how the paint came out on that, and it was a thin nitro that the guy did for me, and you can kind of see little bits of spatter, and I'm sending it off to have the body redone, and then that Blackguard will be back in the signal generator lineup here. Sam Strobing, you've got a matchless with reverb that rattles when you're hauling in your car. Your Princeton reverb doesn't. Do you have something loose in your matchless? You very much could. Matchless though does shock mount an awful lot of stuff. So maybe you're hearing something doing that. It could be the reverb tank. I can't tell you more than that. You need to have a tech look at it. Jeff Mansfield says the Cyber Twin I saw in that store was being returned to the owner after being repaired. Then that owner dodged a bullet. It was a filter cap or a tube or something, not something related to the cyber part of it. Let's go out to the lobby. There's a lot of music I'd like to use for intermission, but they're number one on the free streaming thing from that not Facebook, YouTube makes available to me. That's not an option to just start playing tracks or music or any media. I need to get one of those. If I were to do this on a more professional level, I get one of those third-party streaming platform things, and then I could do that kind of thing. But then you look into copyright. I use yakety sax on a Mesa video, and it promptly got demonetized because apparently um, Boots Randolph and his estate are fastidious on usage of that. And it's weird to me. There are channels I'll see that have a monetized video that plays very recognizable music or even clips of films and stuff. I'm not sure how some people get away with it, others don't. But there's a lot of music I like to use for this kind of thing. I'm not pooping in these things. Let's see. People talking about pooping and scotch and coffee and setting fire to the kitchens. So yeah, I'm out of it for a little bit. Everyone gets delusions of grandeur. Mojo Jojo says, Lyle, any updates on Excalibur? And do you have a waiting list available as of yet? I love your channel, by the way. Thank you very much. I will have information on that coming up. I'm doing a lot of uh, behind the scenes things to make it not only happen, but happen bigger and better than ever. We had some setbacks due to the entire world distribution network going crazy starting in 2020 and still has not recovered. And manufacturers of transformers are no longer with us, and tubes are an issue, and all kinds of stuff. But I've had some opportunities to take advantage of some new uh, chassis designing capabilities, which would mean that I can make the circuit itself take advantage of those opportunities. So more on that to come. Uh, I don't have an opinion on fair price for a Classic 50. The PV Classic 50 was a great amp, but they are prone to heat issues, and some of the pots and stuff PV no longer has in the parts department. So I'm not sure if that's a good investment going forward from this point. That's just the reality of it. Me, myself, and I says I completely black faced the circuit in my 74 twin reverb, eliminated master volume, used high quality components. It sounds great, but it sounded great before. Is it even worth it? I think way too much is made of black facing a 70s Fender amp. If they have like that thing that started on 69 where they have a partially cathode biased output, that's nonsense. Change that back to the cathode bias. Um, there are variations on the changes made over the years. People like freak out if you get one of the ones with the later phase inverter values, like the 330Ks where they used to have 1 megs on the grid leaks. If that's the case, and you want to retain the old sound, two things to know: that 10 nanofarad input coupling cap that was 1 nanofarad on the old ones, change it to a 3.3 nanofarad, and then you'll have the same bass response going into the new phase inverter that you had with the old one, and the rest of it's fine. The bass pot tapers and volume and audio volume and treble tapers changed around late 69, 70. So to get the sound of a 65 at noon, 5.5, you may have to have the treble at 6.5 or 7 on the later ones, and the bass you may need to have it like 3.5 or 4, otherwise it gets too woofy, particularly if you still have that 10 nanofarad on the input cap. So those are things you don't have to do radical changes to adjust. If you have an ultra linear one, or you have one of the ones that uses a resistor instead of a choke, if you just blindly blackface it, you can introduce new problems because the capacitance, the filtering necessary with a resistor is different than the filtering necessary with the choke, et cetera, et cetera. Um, and there's some strange things in those later 71s, like that big 30-watt dropping resistor, uh, just to keep the B plus from exceeding a certain point. So unless you know what you're seeing, don't change things automatically. There's nothing wrong with the sound of a 74, 76 twin, even if it's not exactly the same as a 64, 66. I don't think much of the From L mods. Some of them are fine. So same for the built-in mods. Some of them are fine. Some of them are not great. Some of them are sideways moves. The trouble is people try to do that typically on like a deluxe reverb reissue or a Blues Junior or whatever. And those circuit boards were designed for radial caps with a certain diameter of on their leads. And then they try to squeeze in great big orange drops with a much larger size and a much larger diameter lead with a lot more mass because orange drops equals tone, man. And then the whole thing becomes terrible because the mass of the new orange drop the pad on the other side of the board can't support that. You've already damaged that pad and that trace by jamming um, too large a wire through the hole. Um, you weren't set up to the person doing the work on the kitchen table doesn't have the same soldering gear that someone like me has. And so I'm trying to get the old component out first. They already tore up the pad and then they tore it up more, putting in the orange drop. And then the whole thing weighs too much. So then they got to put some glue in there and they don't know about how this works. So they use hot glue, which then melts when you use the amp for 3 hours and the whole thing gets hot. So if someone wants their amp to sound a different way, a tech will either say, okay, let's talk about this. We can do that within these parameters. And no, we don't need to use an orange drop for that. I can get a Panasonic that fits that exact space and it'll be great. Or the changes that you want to make are so much. So those are big changes. When better just to get something else. Why is the camera cut? There it goes. That's weird. So sometimes a good tech will say, we could do that. We should not do that to this amp because what you're describing, you have a Vox, you want it to sound like a Fender. Let's get you a Fender. Or you have a Fender. What you're describing is a Marshall. You need to get a Marshall. I have worked on Blackface no Reverb Deluxes. I like them very much. I have not worked on a Premier Twin 8. I think I only have one Premier on the channel. That's the only Premier I've worked on. I don't have any thoughts on the Hot Mod by Legendary Tones. Buzz Crumhunger says, not to be a downer, but those old LZ guys, Led Zeppelin guys, need to get some new songs. I think Robert Plant has spent the last 40 years getting new songs. Hey, Alain. Bonjour. Bonjour. I got the FX 951 about a month and a half ago. Scott Wilcox was nice enough to send it to me. I still have not had a chance to calibrate it and start putting it to use. I keep meaning to do that. I think I'll do it this weekend. Then other things come up. In addition to world of amps waiting to be worked on that you can't see, I'm also in the middle of a porch renovation. So I know that 951 is going to be awesome compared to my old, 936. But I've got to calibrate the tips and I got to learn how to do that so I really know what I'm doing and I don't mess it up. You can pay monthly for a service that will let you use the rights to songs. Well, that's good. Thank you, Robert. But then I don't want to pay monthly just to use Yakety Sax once a year. So I got to look into that. Al Moreno, what happened to the 90s twin amp? Did I speak to the famous musician about bypassing the gain channels? I'd like to do that to my 90s super amp. Thanks a bunch. Yeah, I bypassed the effects loop stuff in that amp. I made it quieter. It still wasn't great. And I talked to the guy, his representative, and he said, that's fine. That's fine. We just need it for some stuff. It amazes me when people that you think would be, oh, I need that to be great. I want that to be great. And certainly can afford for that to be great, cheap out. But that happens. So I'm just not going to say anything else about that. I mean, I started that whole process by saying, "I respect your employer very much. His music has meant the world to me. This is not a very good amp." It was a '94 Twin, the Twin or Twin Reverb. "This is not a very good amp. Couldn't we get him something better and make it really fantastic so every time he played, people would hear his old records?" That was not what they wanted, so that's not what we did. Thank you, Victor86HM. He says, "What is your favorite spring reverb and tank? Is there advantage to driving a tank with a tube and B plus to plate coupled transformer over a transistor with the same output and impedance? Thanks." That's a good question. I have not particularly loved the standalone Fender reverb units that I have used. And I've restored quite a few because I find that the dwell thing, once you find where the dwell works, it's a set and forget. I don't play surf. Um, and beyond a certain point, I think pedals begin to make more sense. The two favorite spring reverbs I've enjoyed are either the classic Fender, um, and by which I mean tube. I've not heard a single solid state that I really love, but the classic Fender and the Ampeg which and Trainer where it's capacitance coupled. Um, the Ampeg and Trainer, there can be some noise trade-offs, but you get a lot of depth and you have a less complicated circuit. The Fender old Gibbs would be my preference. If I can't get the old Gibbs, I want one of the old Accutronics. Of modern ones, there's a company that I was told about, Surf something, I need to look into. I have not looked them up. Apparently, they're fantastic sounding reverb tanks, but they're very expensive. And the Mojo Tone medium decay of the standard, the usual suspects on the market today, the Mojo Tone medium decay sounds the most like an Accutronics long decay from the late 60s, early 70s. I've not found anything currently made that sounds like a Gibbs from the early 60s. The Axe Forever says, "I have a Seriatone Chupacabra 100. When I take it off standby, it has electrical buzz sound. You don't hear it through the speakers at all. The amp is actually pretty quiet. A cap. That could be the power transformer. Sometimes they physically vibrate and they can tighten the hardware with the amp off and unplugged from the wall. See if that helps. It can be rectification that you're hearing. It could be a cap, but it's not as likely." Joseph C3 says, "Should I have a good tech check out a new amp just to double check the quality control?" Um, that's going to depend on what you paid for the amp. If you got a $200 amp, don't pay someone $150 to say it's good or bad. If you got something that costs $1,000 or up, and you find a guy who'll, you know, for me to just look at an app and yes or no, that's a $50 diagnostic fee. It can be more than that. If you have an SVT where it's going to be a 2-hour process and the thing weighs 90 pounds, yeah, I'm not going to do that for $50. But if you got a deluxe reverb issue, if you got a pretty much any combo, if there's not a jillion screws to undo to get stuff out, a diagnostic fee covers half an hour. I'll tell you if I see any problems or not. That can be, spend more than $500 on an app. That can be a real good protection of your investment. Or if you buy an app that has a return window. So yeah, I think that's not a bad idea at all to have a tech go through something. Yeah, Brad's agreeing with me on the power transformer buzzing. Guitar Zen says, "If the amp originally calls for 7025s, can I use a 12x7?" Yeah, absolutely. All a 7025 is a 12x7 that's been rated as lowest noise in microphonics. It's just a quiet, sorted 12AX7. They're exactly the same tube. Taylor Limbic says, have I had any of the Crate Palomino series amps on the bench? They're total sleepers. Yeah, there's a video of a Palomino V32 on my channel. And I last week, actually earlier this week, I did a 3112, which is also from the VC series. And I described it in there as a sleeper amp. They're quite well built amps for the price. And given how little they go for used, they're excellent values if someone knows that, hey, I'm probably gonna have to have someone reflow a bunch of solder joints, maybe change out some electrolytic caps at this point because they're 30 years old. But they're certainly better designed and built than most of the things that Fender and Marshall have under $1,500 today on the market. Just in case asked if amp repair modding is my primary or only job. It is my primary and only job. Um, this is what I do. I do this about 12 to 14 hours a day, all the time. Yeah, Gringo Bear, Surfy Bear reverb units. That's the one I was thinking of. I've heard those are fantastic, and I need to check them out. Remember last week I kept fiddling with things on the desk. I need something to fiddle with, or I just drink all the coffee too fast. Thank you, Taylor Limbic. I appreciate that very much. David Pekarsky, just getting in. Morning, David. He's got a YBA Bassmaster. He's having it modded into about a 23 watt super lead with master volume. So excited for this to be completed. I'm not sure why you'd want to change a Bassmaster to a 23 watt amp. I mean, especially since it has if you're adding a master volume, you can have it a 50 watt amp with a master volume, because the level difference between 23 watts and 50 watts is not that great, but they are great amps. Hopefully whoever's doing the work for you is not going to change the suppressor grid wiring. Hey, Jerry London, thanks. Let's start a swear job for a while. I don't swear very often. I try to use it like pepper, just a little bit here and there. I got a crazy Australian friend here if you want to hear it all the time. He swears more often. I swear better. Eddie Lee Fun says, I mean, he's Rick freaking Beato. I must have missed something. I like Beato. I like, I don't care about the top 10 drum intros of all time stuff, though I understand people like that stuff, but I like his music theory and composition analysis, and his sharing the tracks, the stems from well-known tracks and albums. So it's amazing that he has that access. I'm grateful that he shares it with us. Sister Ray 100 says, is it an ES 339? No, I had an Epiphone 339, and they're way too small for me. They look like a ukulele on me. This is a 335. I've been meaning to ask Zach Childs, are you still on the channel? Are you still on here? Because you make the tellies look tiny, and I'm a big guy. But how tall are you, man? What is your opinion on the JCM 900? I own one, and I don't think they deserve all the internet hate. This is me, myself, and I. Well, I've got a SLX right over there. Brad thinks it's fantastic. I think it's okay. It came back. I'd done a bunch of work on it 2 weeks ago, and it came back. The intensity pot, which is the second gain pot, decided to die right after the owner had paid for the work and picked it up. So it's getting two new pots because the gain pot, this first pot, was also a little bit noisy. When you get a 900 SLX or 4100 or 4050, 4500, inspect the board. Look at the videos I have up on the SLX. There are a couple of places where the bridge rectifiers like to burn. And if that board has already been charred real badly, it can be difficult to repair them. If it has not burned too badly, they're easy to service and keep that from ever happening again. I like the 900. I like the um, SLX for certain things. Uh, there's some flaws of the design, which really started with every Marshall made after 1983, once they went to the horizontal inputs, where the input jacks and the pots like to break off the solder joints. The 900s had some stupid normaling decisions done on the output jacks. I cover all that in those videos on the SLX, but they're all fixable. You know, people are like, oh, they started using op amps, or oh, they started using LEDs and stuff. Yeah, they did. And if you like that sound, that's great. They did it well. You know, that JVM 205H I did, was it yesterday or the day before? It gets some really good sounds, and a lot of those really good sounds are the sounds of built-in overdrive pedals, if you want to look at it that way. So you can think of it very disparagingly, but it's certainly less solid state stuff than Black Stars that a lot of players rave about. I think you can get a good sound with the JVMs. I think you can get a good sound with the JCM 900s. It's going to depend on whether it's the right sound for you. Um, I'd rather have one of those than say a, a Randall a la Def Leppard or Pantera, though a lot of the sounds Def Leppard has gotten over the years I love, but those Randalls that they used, not so much. Excalibur, Uncle Meat asked, what is the Excalibur amp modeled after? It is getting some of the sounds of an early 60s AC15 and a little bit of the AC30 flavor as an option once we're in there. I didn't do the tremolo circuit because you can run a lot of good sounding tremolo pedals, including harmonic trim pedals, into the front end of one of those. You know, there's no need to do a real complicated thing that a pedal can do for those who want it. But you can't just copy the old schematic and get an amp that sounds like the old JMIs. Voltage has changed. Those transformers haven't been available in a long time. So there has not been an AC15 made since 1969, really, that's a true AC15. All the ones that you've ever played, from the 90s to now, all the reissue AC15s are 15-watt variants of an AC30, which is not at all the same thing as the original 60s JMI AC15. And that is a really great sounding amp. And I wanted that, but I wanted it to be quieter as far as the noise floor, more reliable, and a little more tonal flexibility. So that core sound is there. And then there's some other things that are going to be available as well. So that if you have that amp and you needed to sound like a deluxe reverb, you could. Are there any sources for replacement control boards for a deluxe reverb reissue? B-side asks. He's repairing one for a friend. Talking about the front board with the pots on it. or the whole board. I'm not sure. I might have one or two floating around here if I didn't toss them on some amps that I think I tossed them, but I might have one or two. Other than that, just check reverb. Sorry. Todd H. Can you recommend? Hey, Hal, thanks for joining us. Oh, Hal, I'll turn off the vibrato. We got a care package from Keeley yesterday, Hal. So, oh, what's going on with that? Huh, that's interesting. Sorry, the amp started going. It's in for service. I'll get to it. Anyway, Hal, we got a Halos. Quiet, wonderful sounding Halos. Anyway, the question was, can you recommend a Marshall amp for home practice or a Marshall sounding amp, head or combo or head? And Bill Box says, I enjoyed the JVM sound in your video, but I'm not a huge Marshall. The vintage modern is not bad, but it's not the real deal. I'll agree with you that. I think the JVM gets better sounds than the studio vintage, even though the studio vintage is closer to being the right circuit. But the studio vintage has got such a terrible output section. JVM is Marshall-esque. The studio vintage is Marshall adjacent. When I do the amps under $2,000 video, I'm actually going to do two. I'm going to do one like general purpose amps and then one more high gain things. And so some of the Marshall stuff is going to be in the second video. But in the first one, I'm going to say various Friedman 20 watts, the Dirty Shirleys and such, and the Marshall 18 watt and the Marshall the 20 watt. I can't remember the model number, 6102. I can't remember. You know, it was a little less common. The lead bass combo, the lead bass Marshall and the 1979 1974X, the 18 watt, various 18 watt clones in the world. The 65 amps London and London Pros. One channel does that. The other channel is more of a Vox thing. But I don't know what your budget is. If you need a Marshall amp for home practice or Marshall sounding amp, you know, that could be anything. The right answer for that could be anything from that crate 3112 that you can get for like $200-300 used if you can find one, to a HG Stomp, depending on your budget and your setup. B-side, I'll look and see if I have a deluxe reverb board with pots that I could hook you up with. I'll see if I have one. You could also contact Fender authorized service centers and see if they have any ones laying around, like an amp that came in that where the different part of the amp caught on fire that's just sitting around. Ron Buchko is happy with his PV Backstage Plus. That's great. I have no desire for anyone to be unhappy with a solid state amp or whatever. It's not about price. This is about tone and reliability. And there are a lot of guys out there making great music every night with PV backstages and all these things. Thomas K says standard Princeton 10-inch versus a limited edition with a 12-inch. I have not heard any of the 12-inch limited editions which come with speakers I like. I don't think that the Greenback's a good pairing with the Princeton. A couple others, the Cannabis Rex. You can get the limited edition with a 12-inch baffle and then change out the speaker if you need to, or you can get any Fender Princeton reissue and get a 12-inch size baffle from Mojotone for about $60, and then you can use the speaker of your choice. I would say that while I like the sound of a 12 in a Princeton, I also like the sound of a 10 in a Princeton. I would play whichever one you like the sound of. A really good 10-inch speaker can be a thing of beauty. Is it true that Fender changed phase inverter input caps to better suit models that were combos versus heads? DDRAC 1. I'm unaware of that. What I am aware of is that some models had 500 picofarad, specifically the Bassman. I think they were trying to limit low end there. And a few others had 500 picofarad versus 1 nanofarad. But I have found that the models with 500 picofarad tend to hum because it's a very high impedance node. And with the lower capacitance, you get hum at the input of the phase inverter. So, as a matter of course, unless someone is dead set on having that vintage correct hum, I will usually change out the input coupling cap on those amps to 1 nanofarad, and the sound stays the same from the musician's point of view, but the hum goes away. A lot of 18-watt Marshall builds are prone to fizziness. They're cathode biased amps, and people make mistakes on that, and they bias them wrong, and they don't use enough screen grids and stuff. But a healthy 18-watt sounds fantastic. It's a very different sound and feel than a 1959 or a 1987, etc. But that's just realistic. Let's see, there it goes. It's really hard to switch pedals while wearing soft-shoed slippers. I'm wearing slippers today, and I don't usually. I need to put on some real shoes. Gringo Pig, he got his dual Showman, but he found it's in bad shape. The board is warped and covered in schmutz. Should I get out for a loss or do a restore? He'd be down 200 pounds if he sold it to the tech. I've done a lot of restoration videos on Fenders from that era. 73 is when they started to heavily wax things. So is yours one of the ones where it's just drenched in wax, or is it right before that? If it's right before that, you can just soak the hell out of things in isopropyl, and then heat up the eyelets. But either way, you're probably looking at 1 to 200 pounds to have that work done. You can do a restoration, but I don't know how much you have in it. If the transformers are good and the tube sockets are good and the coupling caps are good, everything else in that amp can be replaced and you still have a great sounding amp. Thomas K. Sorry, Gary Power says, Thomas K. I played the Chris Stapleton signature Princeton at my local shop. If you're looking at Princeton's, have a look. It's based on the 62, which is a very different Princeton than the 65. If you're looking at the 62, I wouldn't go with the Chris Stapleton. No offense to Chris, I would look at the similarly priced Sir Ombre, much better version of that circuit. Robot Song says, if an amp works when it first turns on, then cuts to about 10% volume after 2 to 3 minutes of playing, what would be your initial gut diagnosis of where to look? Well, something's getting hot, and when it gets hot, it's unhappy. So I would want to know where it's losing the volume. So the first thing I would do is I would measure with the amp on, I would measure plate voltages, and when starting at the output, working towards the input, and when the voltage, when the sound coming out drops, when I get to the next plate, that's where it's losing volume. But I can't give you any more specific advice than that. Or it could be a tube that fails when it gets hot, but typically it's going to be a solder joint or a resistor or something failing under current. Steve Lark says, I'm looking to replace the 2.2K resistor with a choke and a Bassman 10. Will the B plus voltage increase too much? Should I increase the next node dropping resistor? Let's see. I wouldn't necessarily mess with it. Basement 10's kind of an anemic thing. Um, you're not going to have a huge B plus increase if you just put in a choke. These are things you can play around with, but I don't really think that the Basement 10 is a great mod platform unless you need something to learn on it. It's a very spacious, open design, but it's one of their cheap ones. I got a lot of crap from someone who unsubscribed, stormed off in a huff because I said that the Bantam bass was not worth putting a lot of money into, and it's just not. It's got that weird Yamaha speaker thing. It's just it, Fender's had hits and misses in every period, and that's a miss. That's not a very good app. And if disagreeing with me means you can't watch the channel, okay, bye. Go watch funny cat videos. Everyone has got something on this platform to be happy about. What is recommended bias point for an Marshall 18 watt? Marshall 18 watts cathode bias, and it's going to be EL84, so about 100 to 110%. Let's see. So that's going to translate between each tube's going to be bias at idle between 12 and 14 watts, typically between 12 and 13 and a half. Chris Quinn, please expand on getting rid of the fizziness in EL84 cathode bias amps. Friedman seems to have that dialed in. I was impressed by how great the Runt 20 avoided the fizz pitfall. Well, there's a lot of other things besides just the bias. The Runt 20 uses negative feedback. Vox does not, and the 18 watt I don't believe does. I'd have to look at the schematic, but these are one of the, or if it does, it uses a different kind. These are places to look at. You can also look at things like the Vox cut circuit. If you have feedback, you can filter out certain frequencies. Frequencies above X get filtered in that whole thing. There are a lot of tricks to it, and I don't know. Without going into a whiteboard with pointers and diagrams, a little more setup on my end, I don't think we can really do much more than that here. If you really want to learn how to design these things, then one of the best things to do is find an app that you absolutely hate the sound of and find out why that is. Say, hey, if I do this, I like the sound, or this made it worse. So if you if you have an app that you love the sound of and you mess it up, you learn a certain amount of things. But if you have an app that you really don't like the sound of, and then you make it better, that can also be very a very good thing for your development as a designer. But you have to look at how all these things interact, particularly in an app which has negative feedback. If you have an app with negative feedback, then everything from the phase inverter and after is all working together. And sometimes the tone stack's part of that. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to zone out. I'm reading. Didrak says, on a lot of the older Laney amps, such as the supergroups I've seen, why were voltage sharing capacitors not added across the series connected power supply caps? Bad practice, better caps back then. Some caps have series in Marshall and Laney's. Some series caps have resistors across them. Some don't. On the ones that don't, sometimes it's not necessary. Like if you have, and I've seen this on Laney's and almost all Marshalls, if you have the center tap of the HT supply referenced to the midway point in between two series caps for your first node, that will force that to be the true midway point. So you don't have to use those two resistors there. In fact, you'll see a lot of Marshalls where they'll have two series nodes, 200s in parallel with each other and in series with each other for the reservoir, then for the screen. And the reservoir does not have dropping resistors, and the screens, each one has 56K. But you'll notice that there's a wire going to that junction point of the two on the reservoir. That's the center tap for the HT supply. So that will force that to be the midway point. You don't have to have those resistors. The screen one doesn't have that, so they have to have the 56Ks, so the voltage gets divided up equally, so each capacitor is within its voltage rating. But some amps out there, and possibly some ladies, don't have those balance resistors where they do need to have them. In which case you're just hoping that everything stays the same. So unless you have an HT center tap reference at the series connection, you typically do need the voltage balance resistors on each cap in a series node. Anthony Mancini got a Wagner Shiva that's got a strange hiss, and they do have power supply issues. That 12-volt supply that they use for the DC and for the heaters and for the switching can make noise in those things, and those things fail. Do I know of any competent techs in Atlanta? I don't know of any. I'm not saying that anyone. I'm not failing to mention someone in Atlanta because I think they're incompetent, but I don't personally know any techs in Atlanta that I know of. But I'm sure they're out there, and I would bet that Dave Amarato that you see on Beato's channel and on um, Rhett Shule's channel would know, and I bet Red Shul would know, and I'm sure he's mentioned it in some of his videos. I don't have time to watch all their videos, and also when I'm done working, I tend not to watch guitar stuff because that's my day gig. Before this, I was watching an analysis of the cinematography choices of the Coen brothers. All right. I think I've almost caught up with everything. And we've been doing this for a little over 2 hours. I'm going to do one more intermission, and we're going to go about 2.5 hours today. But at the end of today, Brad is going to do a live premiere of his next video, which will have comments. So when we are done here, Brad's going to start up, and I'm going to go watch that, and you guys can continue. So I'm going to do another about 4-minute intermission, and then we'll do another 20, 30 minutes, and then it'll be time to do all this fun stuff on Brad's channel. All right, we're back. Let's see what goodies we got from Tube Depot just now. Tube-a-doo-ba-doo. I love these. It's like getting a care package. Let's see what's in here. Okay, a bunch of Mallory 150s that are going to be used for the 2 silver tones. All those green caps are going away. Got some EL84s. Got a 6AU6, a GE, and a rectifier tube for that blue deluxe reverb over there. So groovy, groovy, groovy. My trash can's over there, so it's not out of it's out of the picture. Let's see, what have I missed here? Crikey. Now, Brad, how the hell do you know someone in Atlanta and I don't? Maybe you just pay more attention than I do. Brad and I are in a couple of tech groups together, and maybe he just looks at where people are at more than I do. Yeah, Steve Lark, Basement 10, you can do an awful lot with, but you notice you replace that output transformer. You really need to. Just play acoustic, it's cheaper. Yeah. Martins are better than Matons, but still. Educate is not over. I was just taking the second break. You know, when you do all this and you only one guy, sometimes you got to do stuff and you can't just be chained to your computer. So it's good for us to have little intermissions. Go carbon fiber. You can go fishing in it. Yeah, it makes a good canoe. I'm not sure if it makes a good guitar, but it makes a great canoe. Yeah, I'd rather have a bunch of real optimal amps than just a whole bunch of amps of various quality and operational point, Chris. Yeah, Brad, if you have any, if you need any tips on the JMI, I'll be glad to. But I know you know your way around just about everything that I know. Jack Carter says, "Hey, I own a Fender hand-wired Stapleton Princeton, the 6G2. I like how it sounds. What are some suggested quality changes besides replacing the ICs and Fender labeled electronics? Does that thing have ICs or does that thing have Spragues? Oh, some of their hand-wired stuff, they use Spragues. And the Fender labeled electronics, you know, they use those stupid blue caps. Those are cheap caps covered in blue plastic. I wouldn't change anything in that. I'll tell you honestly, I would sell it as is to someone who wants the Chris Stapleton, Fender handwired, and use the money to go sideways into the Sir, because the Sir Ombre is a much better version of that same amp, and it will hold its quality and price a lot longer. Let me show you guys something funny. This is the hat I wear when doing my actual tech videos because I have a little lav mic here on the brim. I don't wear hats in real life for obvious reasons because I look like this. But I'm not a hat guy. But I used to have the lav mic here where people wear lav mics. And as I moved around doing stuff or it got closer to surfaces, it would drop out or get echoey or be weird. And so I've been playing around with places for this to be. You know, for a long time I had it here aimed at my mouth. And just picked up every breathing sound, made me sound like I had emphysema. So I think this placement has worked out better because it's getting the voice. You're not hearing it now, otherwise you're da, 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 da. But it's getting the voice well, and the plosives are gone. But I'm not getting that a huge breath thing. So this is the sacrifice I make for you people. Every time I'm doing something on the bench. Yoop-a-doop-a-doo. Yeah, you need to send me a stubby cooler. I have to buy some cooler some stubbies to keep cold in. Abigail Britton says, I saw you used a cable gland in a previous video. Any recommendations for application ordering? Yeah, I use them anytime I need to secure a chassis. They're so much better than the old press-ons that only go like that from one angle because it puts even pressure all around. And you don't have to have a weird D drill. It takes a circular opening. It's made by Heiko, just the same as the company that makes the old style, and you can get them in a 1/2 inch or a 0.625. For the chassis hole, and they hold for different outer diameter cables, and they have them at Mauser. In fact, in one of the recent videos, thank you, love. In one of the recent videos, I even shared that part number. Someone asked about that, and that was the one that takes the 1/2 inch hole. But if you click that link, and you'll find all the ones that Heiko makes on Mauser's page. Whichever. Most of the guitar cables that I use when I send an amp out that gets a new power cable is an SJT, which is a smaller diameter, and so I use a certain Heiko for that. And here's an SJT. I'm sorry. This is an SVT. The SVT power cable is a smaller diameter. I use a certain Heiko for that. On other amps, I use an SJT, which is a larger diameter power cable, and I've got to use a different Heiko cable gland for those. And I have all that in various saved parts things on Mauser. Amazing tech in Salem or Portland, Oregon. I don't know if Brad does, but I do, Colby Jack. I know a guy named Kai Kye Kennedy. He used to be in Memphis, then he was in Nashville, then he was in Chicago. Now he's up in the Portland area, and he's fantastic. So look up Kai Kennedy. Wes Chilton says, what's a better move? Build a Mojo Tone 5E3 kit or save up and buy a reasonably priced vintage one? I don't know that there's going to be a reasonably priced vintage one again. The market is crazy. The Mojo Tone kits, if built properly, can be every bit as good. If they're shipping with Habor stuff, it's good quality iron. The trouble is you have to have a builder who knows what to follow and what to ignore in the Mojo Tone instructions. So if you want to build one yourself, get all the stuff, and I'll tell you what else to order to use instead of some of the components that they send, and I'll step you through it because 5E3 is a really simple thing. It's just a really simple thing that's usually done poorly. It's like a cheeseburger. When it's done right, it is the best thing you'll ever eat, but it's so rarely done right. Ooh, you tried a wireless lav mic. Yeah, they don't sound good. Those are, I think, desperation moves, and for people. And I know that the ones that they use on films, the wireless lavs that they can hide and close in wigs on actual big budget movies, are not $400 mics. Those are like $2,000. I've not had any third powers in Mojo Jojo. That's a fun name to say, Mojo Jojo. But I've heard good things about third power, but I have not had any in front of me. Same for the revs. I've heard good things, not had any revs. Odd UK says, I recently heard Oddly Freed, Cry of Love, playing through a 64 AC30, and I swear it was one of the greatest amp tones. Is it futile to chase this tone through any of the reissues? I could afford a 90s top boost, TB. It is not futile. I'm not sure that you'll sound like Audrey, no matter what you play through. And I don't know what else was in that recording, was using that recording. A 64 AC30 is one of the great sounds there are. That said, I have done an awful lot of modded reissues of various stripes, and they, if Audrey were here playing them, that's what they would sound like. And Rick's good too in Portland. I forgot about Rick Dirch was up there. In stock form, you'd be happier, I think, with the custom series than the TB or TBX. The TB and TBX have ground loops built into the circuit. I mean, they were built to be noisy from the factory. They've got tons of factory errors. People are like, "Oh, it's made in the UK. It's got to be better." Yeah, it's bad amp design and bad construction. Genuine UK build. It's like a Triumph for a Spitfire, not the airplane, the car. An MG, whatever, beautiful things, and sometimes they run. I have fixed a lot of TBs and TBXs. They're on my channel. You can find what I'm talking about in terms of this was a mistake and here's how to fix it. But whether you get the hand wired or the custom, I would choose either of those over the TBX, unless you want to put a lot of money into making a TBX great. And it is possible to do that. Yeah, Peter and Rick are fantastic up in Seattle. Yeah, man, Brad, we need to figure out a way for us to do this together on split screen thing on those times when we're both awake at the same time. It's great being. If I don't know, you do, and it's just a random flip of the dice that my channel took off first, and I hope that yours catches up because you certainly deserve it. So anyone who comes to this, I want them to know about you. So I'd be glad to have you be a co-host of any of this stuff, and you just take over when I need to take a leak. Chris Quinn says Kyle builds a 5E3. Next video. I don't know who this Kyle is. I don't think he'd do as good a job as I would. What do you think about a 73 Trainer YGL Mark III, YGL3 Mark III? Is that their version of the Twin? I have a hard time remembering numbers and letter sequences. I can remember an entire Shakespeare soliloquies, tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow creeps forward in this petty pace from day to day, from now to the last syllable of recorded time. Life is but a passing shadow, a poor player, struts and frets, blah, blah, blah. But I can't remember what's the YGL, what's the EL34, what's the 6L6, all these little acronyms. If it's the one I'm thinking of, I did one about a year or two, I guess 2 years ago. And it's a really nice sounding amp. When I say twin-like, I mean it fits the same role within a band. It's not a copy of a twin. Ishinri, you kid. Good, reasonably priced amps for playing punk/rock at moderate volumes. I don't think punk is supposed to be played at moderate volumes. There's a case for an old 80s solid state PV, if ever I heard one. If you want to get the authentic punk experience, at least as far as what I remember the punk scene being like in the late 80s and the 90s, any amp that you had that could make a distorted sound, turned up as loud as it could be, put up on a plastic milk crate. That's the thing. I'm not sure that you want a good amp for that. If you want to go to the height of that scene, maybe Bad Brains and Husker Du, you're talking about JCM 800s. Beat to hell JCM 800s. If you're talking about what a lot of people today consider punk, Green Day or what's that awful band? Um, with the Tom DeLonge Strat guitars and all that stuff. I can't remember the name of that awful thing. Most stuff, most punk after Nirvana is just bad pop. Might as well get a modeling peddler. Yeah, the Twin 12. Those are great. And they have a real weird capacitance driven reverb circuit. So there's a little bit of buzz at higher levels, but it gets really deep. Thanks. Yeah. Thank you. If you want Husker Du, Bob Mould did use twins, but he also used 800s, and you won't get that sound out of a twin at any moderate volume. I would, yeah, Robert M. I am exactly talking about the Antenna Club. If you want to sound like Husker Du, I could sound like Husker Du with that Strat or that SG and this, or one of the deluxe reverbs over there, and a rat pedal. Would I sound exactly like any one particular album? No, but they didn't sound like that live. But it's not going to be a beautiful sound because they weren't. And it also depends on what era of Husker Du you're talking about. But like makes no sense kind of thing. Tiger by the Tail. I love that song. Or even just the Mary Tyler Moore theme. Love is all around. I would say anything with humbuckers doesn't have to be a flying V. The bonus points if it's a flying V. Into a JCM 800 2204, not a split channel reverb. And you're there. But yeah, you could also just use any amp with a rat in front of it. I need to put a graphic up here. I've got the graphic that says Sonic Audio. I need a graphic that says, I don't work on monoprice. I will never work on monoprice amps. They are garbage. I don't understand. It's like asking a car mechanic about Yugos all the time. Blink 182. Yeah, that's what I was trying to think of. Terrible, terrible, terrible thing. Blink 182, so bad. I think Green Day is horrible too, but at least they thought they were being dangerous. 6v6 new production is pretty much the TAD red bass and electro harmonics right now, and that could change. Yeah, but he asked about moderate volume. If you get an MXR Distortion Plus into Silverface Twin Reverb at the volumes that Mould was using them back in like 1982, his next question and his permanent question at that point will be what? It's just too much. Me, myself, and I would not pay anything for that Music Man because they're too loud and they're just too big from my taste. That would not be something I would want, but they are good for what they do. Hey, John Williamson. Yeah, I think it's a 3200 series. I can never remember things like that. I save little links, and I've got BOM saved on Mauser, and I've got stuff saved on DigiKey and all my vendors. I've got saved projects, so I don't have to remember all that stuff. Distortion plus rad, all that stuff. Any of that will get that kind of sound. Am I a Beatles gear guy? I am. Day Tripper. Is George playing his Tennessean through a Bassman Deluxe? He may be playing a Strat for the middle eight. Not sure George and John had casinos yet. Day Tripper, I believe, and it's what he used in the video at least, is an ES345 on the bridge pickup. And sounds to me like he's playing into an AC30. And I can get that sound. I can't do it for you right now. But if I had that AC15 over there hooked up, if I were to, I can get the Day Tripper sound almost with the bridge pickup 35 and a stock AC30. And I've shown that setting in some of the AC30 tone stack videos. The trick where I can't quite get it exactly the same is his 345 would have had flat wounds, and I'm not putting flat wounds on my guitar to get that one sound. Then you run it into the EMI Reg console with the Fairchild compression and the EQs and stuff, and then it's mastered. So it's not, you know, and it was mic'd with a U47, a tube U47, I think, might have been an FET. So there's a lot more than just the guitar or the amp, but I suspect that was the bridge on his new ES345, which he didn't have for very long, into an AC30. And that's what that sounds like. Well, George Bush was an idiot, but Green Day, the minute they came out trying to sound like they were Cockneys or anyhow related to Joe Strummer, it just rubbed me the wrong way. Cool about oddly 73 Super Lead and the Muscle Shoals Vibrolux. Hey, and they all full circle back to the Vibrolux. Fantastic amps. All right, we're about to wind this down. Blink 80, they were bigger. Sadly, they kept having hits, and they're probably still going to keep having hits. But Swerve Driver, not in a long time. I'm cramming for a Christmas gig. Do you know any Christmas songs? What's your favorite? I do know a lot, but I don't have many favorites. My favorite two Christmas albums are Charlie Brown Christmas with a Vince Guaraldi trio and A Medieval Christmas by the Boston Cantata. Sorry, not Cantata, Camerata, which are very unlike the chestnuts roasting things, but I don't think it's time to do a Christmas video. Speaking of Christmas and videos, next weekend I've got some family stuff lined up, so I think I'm not going to be able to do a live stream next Saturday. Yeah, I think John Williamson, they had some FETs coming in around the time of Abbey Road. I could be wrong, but I think they had the tube on Revolver and Help era stuff. I have not worked on a Summer Zodiac, but I think we're about to wrap this up, and then we're going to, for those of you who wish to, come join me over on Brad's channel, Brad's Guitar Garage. He's going to debut a video when this ends, and that when you debut a video, there'll be a chat with that. We can continue. I would like to say that Slade, Merry Christmas, everybody. I don't think it's the best Christmas song. I love it very much, and I played it on a thank you, Merry Christmas to everyone video. Was it last Christmas or the year before? And Sony Music Group blocked it. And I don't think that Naughty would have had a single problem with me playing that for you guys. Yeah, there's a lot of U67s. I mean, there's a lot of all kinds of stuff. When they only had 4 tracks to work with, they did everything they could before it hit the tape and how it hit the tank. All right, so there's a link to Brad's video. So we're about to stop this one, and then I want everyone to click that link and watch that video because Brad's awesome. If you like what I do, you'll fucking love what he does. He just talks really funny. You'll bear with him. You'll catch up pretty quick. So I think I want to thank everyone for joining here here. Again, ask Zach. Zach Childs was here earlier. If you don't know Ask Zach, go to his channel after Brad's video. Just I'm amazed by the support of the YouTube community. And let's end this in 3, 2, 1. See ya.